The 1970s were the decade in which video games truly began with classic arcade games. From bouncing a ball against two paddles in Pong, from bouncing a ball against one paddle in order to destroy bricks in Breakout, to shooting lasers from a spaceship in order to destroy aliens and Space Invaders, leading to Japan's dominance in the video game industry for the next quarter of a century. But with this being such an early period for the art form, many of these games were bound to be lost to the sands of time. So today, let's take a look at many of the lost 1970s arcade games. Now obviously, I can't be comprehensive with this video, so if I miss something interesting, please tell me in the comments. But before we begin, I want to thank this video's sponsor, you. Thanks for watching. So first, let's take a look at one of Taito's earliest arcade games, predating Space Invaders, a 1975 arcade game called Western Gun, which was programmed by Tomohiro Nishikado, the creator of Space Invaders. Now, this game was brought over to North America by Midway, renamed to Gunfight, and despite what you might think, this version was changed so significantly, it's basically a different game. I'm pretty sure that you can gauge what this game was about from both titles. It's actually seemingly the first video game to depict human-on-human violence. While there are dumps of Gunfight online, there are no dumps of Western Gun. There are dumps of a Japanese Taito game called Western Gun Part 2, however this is just a modified version of Nintendo's Sheriff, aka Shigeru Miyamoto's first game. You know, now that I think about it, the video game industry in the 70s was kinda like the plot of Toy Story, with the Western Gunslinger games being replaced by space games. So why hasn't Western Gun ever been dumped? Well, I assume it's because the game runs on discrete logic. Meanwhile, Gunfight uses a microprocessor, making it run so much smoother. While there's plenty of materials that exist from the game, the only footage of Western Gun in action comes from a Japanese documentary called TV Game Museum. So what was the first ever fighting game? According to Hardcore Gaming 101, it was the 1979 game Warrior. They're wrong. Before that, in 1976, Sega had released an arcade boxing game called Heavyweight Champ, one of their first big successes. However, HG101 said they didn't count boxing games, so that's fair. But they did count fencing games, and with that rule in place, they're still wrong, as before either game was released, a company called Project Support Engineering, or PSE for short, released a fencing game called Knights in Armor in 1976. The only known owner of this game is someone called Seth Soffer, who runs a museum of various arcade machines from the 1970s called Arcade 72. And all we have of this game is the flyer, machine schematic, and footage released by Soffer in 2017. It seems to have the same issue that prevents it from being emulated as Western Gun, as it runs on discrete logic. But let's back up to talk about Sega's game, Heavyweight Champ. It's super well documented, but despite this, the game is lost. The biggest hurdle with getting this game dumped is the exact same reason why other games I've discussed so far have given collectors constipation. But on top of that, cabinets are exceedingly rare. Yet another Sega game called Break Open from 1978 seems to suffer from the exact same issues, except even less is known about it, aside from it being a clone of Breakout. Tic Tac Quiz is another discrete logic game by Sega that's even rarer. Moving on, in 1978 and 79, Sun Electronics would release 3 arcade games. A Breakout clone called GT Block Challenger, another version called GT Block Perfect, and a Space Invaders clone called Galaxy Force. Not much is known about these games, but they're notable for being the first games released by Sun Electronics, which would later rename its video game division to Sunsoft. Now I need to say that as far as I know, these games do not suffer from the same main issues preventing widespread availability as the other games I've covered so far. By the time these games were released, it was common practice for arcade video games to use microprocessors for most things. It seems to be a rarity problem. Next we have Dracula Hunter, a 1979 or 1980 game released by a mysterious company called Tenkan Kagyo and was developed by Tekkon, the company that would later become Tecmo and now Koei Tecmo. Both an upright cabinet and a cocktail version were released. I was going to cover this for a Halloween video, but I was too busy with Nintendo November, so I released that crappy Castlevania video instead. But it's potentially the first game based off of Dracula. It's a shooter, and unlike the Space Invaders and Galaxian clones of the time, it takes place on ground and seemingly has a really confusing control scheme. The game was seemingly popular enough to be referenced in the manga Game Center Arashi. There have been tons of videos of the game in action that have surfaced online since 2012, including one in 2018, in which the creator of the video claimed they were playing it on an emulator. Well, that's nice. Where's the ROM? That same year, the complete cabinet was listed on a Yahoo Japan auction. It's unknown who bought it or if it was actually sold at all. Next, we have the 1979 game Yosaku. This game is named after a 1978 song by Saburo Kitajima about a woodcutter and his wife. The game was the first game published by Shin Nihon Kikaku, or SNK, and was developed by Orca, the company that would later become legendary shmup developer Teleplon. SNK licensed the song the game was named after, and a variant of it plays in-game. It's about cutting trees while dodging murderous forest critters. Despite its historical significance, it has never been successfully dumped. Once again, it's not a discrete logic game. It's just never been dumped. It spawned loads of clones, including one that served as the first game for Japan's first original video game console with interchangeable cartridges, the Cassette Vision. And these are all preserved. But the original game hasn't been, and the only footage of it can be found in this YouTube video I'll link to below. Now let's talk about Nintendo's lost arcade games. Well, arcade video games to be specific, as a lot of their early mechanical stuff is lost to time for obvious reasons. Nintendo's first two arcade games, Black Fever and Computer Othello, have gone undumped as they are fairly rare. I think you can figure out what they're about from their titles. Yeah, that's really all I have to say. Moving on, in 1978, a company called Sankyo began producing video games, of which they made 3. Castle Take in 1978, Pyramid in 1979, and Tag Play in the same year. Castle Take was, what else, a breakout clone with a feudal Japanese theme. Weirdly enough, a majority of this game's documentation can be found on Twitter. Former editor-in-chief of Japanese gaming magazine Gamist, Zenji Ishii, shared a picture he took of the game in 2014. User Zavinga84 posted a flyer of the game they found in 2015. The owner of Natsuge Museum in Akihabara shared some images of the game in 2018. This user posted a picture of the game in 2021, and user Autobahn JP shared the cover of the game's service instructions in 2023. There's a very strong following for the game in its home country, but it's never been dumped. From the screenshots, I can tell it was very impressive and quite colorful considering the time period it was made in. Pyramid was also a breakout clone, this time with an ancient Egyptian theme. The magazine Game Machine had an article about the game's announcement in October of 1979, and Famitsu wrote an extensive article on the game in 1993, once again showing that these games still have fans who fondly remembered them well after their initial release dates. In 2014, a user on Nico Video released footage of the game, showcasing its attract mode. And my lord, this is technically impressive for 1979. Footage of the game could also be seen very briefly on an episode of the Japanese TV show Game Center CX. Apparently, a YouTube video was uploaded showcasing the game in action, but it has since been privated. Not much is known about Tag Play though, other than that it was a maze game predating Pac-Man. It doesn't seem to be as fondly remembered as their breakout clones. After this, Sankyo would quit the video game industry and focus solely on pachinko machines, which kinda sucks. They clearly put a lot of effort into their video games and developed quite a following off of them. They could have easily been as big as Taito, Namco, Capcom, or Sega had they kept going. As for these games being released, I'm very uncertain as to if they will. As much as they have a cult following in Japan, these games were only released in Japan, and it seems Japan has a sort of constipation culture around old games like this. But maybe a collector from another country owns cabinets and has the means to dump them, so who knows? Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.